I'd like to introduce the people who are going to be speaking today. So I'm the convener of Urban Ecology Australia, Jo Thomas, and a Christie Walk resident, and I'll be speaking about Christie Walk a bit later. I've also got Graham Parsons from Miller's Corner, who'll be talking, of course, about Miller's Corner. And from Aldinga Arts Eco Village, we've got Trisha O'Donovan, which is great to have everyone here. And we've got a few other people in the room watching. So the first thing would be to acknowledge country. So Mani Nabudni and Ninamani, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet today on the land of the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today and acknowledge the country that anyone else might be joining us from. I'd like to also acknowledge that Kaurna land was never ceded.
Oh, fantastic, Jo. Thanks for that. Look, I've prepared a series of slides here, and I'll try not to talk to all of them because I just sort of want to make more of this more of a conversation than a presentation. To step right back to the very beginning, Leah and I, my partner and co-founder in Miller's Corner, basically lived 500 metres from the centre of Mount Barker. And when we moved there 26 years ago, we were looking out the back to sheep and horses. And fast forward to the present day, we find ourselves in the middle of the fastest growing town in South Australia and surrounded by a lot of other housing developments. So our area was about nearly 7,000 square metres, and we had long been interested in community and felt that rather than retiring and selling up and doing a sea change, that we would actually look to try and build where we were living, because we had a lot of very strong relationships still in the area. All of our children went to the local Waldorf school in Mount Barker. And as a consequence, we set about looking at what we can do. And sorry, Jo, just back in that first one. That first image, essentially, we worked with Yvette Sunstead, who I think actually did the mural down here, and looked at how we can maintain the structure, the tree infrastructure which we had there, and develop this into something which we would was both beautiful and enjoyable to live. So we were quite fortunate in many aspects that we were able to come up with a design which I suppose one of the critical parts of the design was that we don't have any parking within the community area. So all the parking's out the front, which is sort of on the right there. We had an existing residence which we're still living in, and we wanted the scale of the houses to actually relate to the buildings there. So maybe if we can go to the next slide. Thanks.
No, it doesn't want to do it.
Well, first. Yep. So our vision was to build a socially and ecologically sustainable intergenerational co-housing community. It's a lot of words there, and what does that actually mean? So looking at building dwellings with minimal energy and resource use, develop site dwellings, encourage social interaction, create shared community facilities, and promote a social environment to foster close community based on safety, honesty, respect and cooperation. We started this journey probably in 2007, and it took us probably 5 years to get to a clarity in terms of what we wanted to do. It then took us 3 years to get through council, and we really started building in infrastructure in 2017. So it's been quite a journey. Next slide, please. This is a few snaps of Forest House, which is a community centre. We chose hempcrete as our main building material, and Wistow and Kathmandu stone. The concept of the community centre was actually the first house, first dwelling which was built. It's not really a dwelling, the first building built there, so that we actually had a focal point for the community, and also knowing that that was where Forest House is really the heart of the community. It's set in virtually in the middle of it as well. Next slide, please. These are some slides from photos from inside the building. We had a lot of pine trees on the site, and these are Aleppo pines. We slabbed those and essentially made them into as part of the features within the house. So you have a curved balustrade and the curved part in the second floor in the mezzanine area, and we use the timber in the balustrade. You can the ceilings were made out of Baltic pine. So this is just a snapshot of the kitchen area and area where we gather. Next slide. These are some more ones. We really were in love with the stone, and so we built a chimney which was taken from the land from the stone from Kathmandu. Next one. Okay, so ultimately we're looking at 13 individual dwellings. It's a community title. The block sizes range from 240 to 400 square metres. Combination of single, two-storey, detached and duplexes. Just point out before, the main feature being parking out the front of the community. There's a balance between private and public space. So the open spaces are at the front of dwellings and private spaces at the rear. The footprints of the buildings were essentially 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We have no fencing past the front of the dwellings. We have areas for community gardens and orchards, and we also work with South Australian Power Network to develop an embedded network, electrical network, with plans for future solar carports and electric vehicle charging stations. Next, please. Our sustainability aims were looking at passive solar designs, the use of hempcrete, and source of sustainable materials. Now, since we're building most of this stuff during the middle of the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of challenges in sourcing materials. The hempcrete ended up coming from France. To get the binder, which is used in the hempcrete, we ended up having to essentially make our own mixture for it. And even timber, which we like to use hardwood timber for a lot of the exposed timber beams and so forth, was extremely difficult and expensive to get. Our social aims were a vibrant community with active participation, a shared vision, values, but it was really important for it to be intergenerational and diverse. So we have young families there and older people. We're actually quite diverse in terms of nationalities, although all at this point in time European, Australian, European based. Our governance, we use a sociocracy model and with 4 circles of responsibilities: administration, social, community centre, and grounds and maintenance. This is very much work in progress, and I think it will always be work in progress, because this is about how we relate to each other and communicate together. I should have mentioned, and I want to pay acknowledgement to Christy Walk. When we were in our very early days of doing this, we had some wonderful conversations with particularly with Effie Best, who was happy to share a lot of the early work and including how the governance model, etc., worked here, and we've and she was quite happy for us to use that components of that model to adapt to what we were doing in Mount Barker. Okay, So lessons learnt. It will take much longer than you think it should. The finding trusted professionals to support you was a really important one, because at the end of the day, I ended up doing project management for 5 of the builds, which was something which I had very little experience in, but was virtually required to do it because we lost our first builder who went bankrupt after taking deposits. So we were out of the pocket substantially, and to actually find people who had any experience, well, there was very few people who built with hempcrete in South Australia at all. There's still very few people. And we found that we could find trusted contractors who essentially the only way we got through this really was to call them up, and they would come along and do the work and send us the bill. So we didn't do any tender. We tried tendering initially, but we didn't do any ask for bids for the work done. We just had people who we could trust. And one of the big challenges is finding a way to engage all the members, future as well as of the community as often as you can. And I think probably the same here at Christie walk the very fact that you don't really have access to your cars apart from the car park, and there's we end up walking through the community all the time, and so those incidental meetings of people have been ones which really develop those relationships. We had a set of core values which weren't negotiable. For instance, if we said, look, you can put a carport in front of your house, we probably could have sold them three times over. But we weren't prepared to let those things go. But there are other things which we did move on. You know, the dog and cat policy was something which we're still working through, and acknowledge how important animals can be in people's lives. But at the same time, also the needing to have the respect for your neighbours with those things. To adapt to changes, and as we're all aware, these last few years, there's been a huge amount of changes in everyone's lives, and to get locked into something rather, say particularly you wanted something sustainable material, and then you could sit around and wait for months for these things to happen. So we've just had to say, look, we'll just go and find ways to enjoy the process, which is a really important one, particularly for me, because it, when you're managing 5 houses at one time, it can be quite overburdening. And I think we grabbed this most intensive self-development you'll ever do, one from the where was it there? The group in New Zealand. Earth Song, yeah. And the last one, it's well worth it. So I've just got a few other photos of where we are with things. Oh, sorry, care of community, that was the other thing here. So there's a financial one. We have a $350 a quarter sinking fund contribution. The great thing about it is that we can decide what amount that is to be, and initially we've set it at that level to get some funds into the community corporation. A lot of work is still done by community members, particularly in lands and maintenance side of it. Care of community with regarding social. We've got currently 9 residents living there, 4 moving in the new year, and we have 2 completed homes which were duplexes, which are on the market for sale. So as co-founders, Leah and I have, it's one of the challenges have been getting others to take on active roles within the community, because we know all the things and how it all works and so forth. And sometimes you feel stepping back and asking people to step forward can be a challenge, because people think, can we do it? Can we do it as well, or are we doing it right? So we're still working through those things, and it's lovely to see we're getting a new person in the next few weeks, and she's got a lot of energy and drive, and that will be great to sort of bring a different balance into there. Our community centre is currently underutilised. It's a fantastic space. I play music there with some friends on Thursday nights, and we have occasional shared meals and that. And we have workshops. It's sort of quite open to the more general community because we don't see ourselves just being Miller's Corner. We see ourselves as part of the community in Mount Barker as a whole. And so we do encourage and give the opportunity for other people to use the space for a nominal contribution. And and also I think when more people are around and people have settled in, it's those first years or so when you're getting your garden together and your landscaping and all of those other things that we do have. We're having a shared pre-Christmas thing coming up soon. Okay, next one. So these are just a few of the slides. I'll just shots of the houses. This is a relatively small house. It's about 70 square meters. It's one person's living there. The front's made out of the yellow is made out of hempcrete, and the other bit is made out of WeatherTex, which is another sustainable product. Next one. This is a glimpse of the inside. So a single person's living here. So there's a mezzanine, there's a bit of a ladder climbing up, and you can see the exposed beams. And I think the aesthetics were really an important part of the building for us. Next one. And so bathroom, kitchen of that one. Just sort of slide go through these very quickly. These are two. It's a duplex, but they're only a single story one out the front. There's a lot of hempcrete in these, and the yellow one is currently we have a resident there. The one at the back, the purple has where it's a 2-bedroom place. This is streetscape looking through to some of the duplexes and single buildings. The building down at the bottom is the 4-bedroom place, which we're looking for a new residence for there. Next one. And these are some of the images of inside of that place. And a few more. I think that's about it for me.
So hi there, I'm going to talk about Christie Walk, and I guess the big difference from the presentation that we've just heard about Miller's Corner is that Christie Walk is now a couple of decades on, and so perhaps the actual development phase is less relevant in some ways, but there are some great commonalities just listening to the discussion we've already heard. I've really structured my talk around the 4 C's of Christie Walk, and then there'll be a few more C's that come up later, but don't worry, there's nothing too alarming about the words I'll use. So we talk about the 4 C's of building sustainable community. The words that I'm using here are commitment, community, continuing, and communication. So if we look at commitment, 1991 was the birth of Urban Ecology Australia. If we go from that to the turning of the first sod 8 years later, you've got to have commitment to really stay in the game if it takes that long to get something up and running. And you've got to have commitment through a lot of challenges and bumps on the road. And it's not all bad, but there is some hard work involved. And community, really building around a shared vision, and our Ecopolis principles are what the community and the development is built around. Continuing being living more sustainably, which is never attained, it's always an ongoing process. And then communication. For Christie Walk, I guess the current period is filled with sharing what we've learned with the wider community through site tours, events, and being a carbon neutral ambassador. But communication is also really important in sustaining community. So the vision was that and I'm quoting someone else here, but we wanted a green community, comfortable for the residents, but kind to the environment, something that would significantly cut our environmental footprint. We wanted a working alternative to urban sprawl. We wanted to heal the web of life by bringing biodiversity back into the city. And we wanted it to be a community, not just a collection of disconnected dwellings. And I think that's really important, because the thing that you perhaps realize more when you start living in a development like this is that sustainability comes not just from the building materials, not just from the design of buildings, but it comes emphatically from the shared nature of living in a community and the connections. At Christie Walk, really the size of the footprint would not be possible without a strong community cohesion. Ecopola's principles are actually, there's a much longer version of this, but they really were, I think, very important at the beginning to bring people in, not just to that broader vision statement, but to the sort of elements that were going to be important. What were they going to do to build this place? What were the things that were really important? And so restoring degraded land, fitting with the bioregion, balancing development, all of these things, optimising energy performance were very important, but also those other things like promoting social equity and respecting history. These things have been important values to strive for and things to share. I think the shared vision is so important when you're going to embark on a development on a project like this. It doesn't just stop, though, with the building of the buildings. It really provides the cohesion that brings the community together, because in fact you often have quite a few diverse people. We don't vet who comes to live here, so having some shared values, some shared vision is really important in creating cohesion. So it's got an enduring effect, and I think getting that right at the outset is probably very important. So I'm just going to talk about the development, which I really wasn't around for, but I've heard lots of discussion before, and there are people online that will know more about this than me. But the vision was really the start, and that was translated into the organisation that is Urban Ecology Australia. And I've represented this as a whole cycle because it has been a cycle, I think. Urban Ecology was one of the organisations that was pivotal in setting up this development through the vision, through people like Paul Downton, the architect, whose vision around Ecopolis and the cities being able to save the rest of the world by creating more livable cities, more sustainable cities, and stopping that urban sprawl. And then that comes to Wirranendi, where you need to set up a housing cooperative essentially to get things on the road. And there were a number of organisations. So Wirranendi was the organisation that then partnered with EcoCity Developments to build the first two stages. But when we came to the final stage of Christie Walk, which was the large apartment block, which you see at the front, both bodies came together in a joint venture. It was a much more commercial build, and Tagara was employed as the builder to actually do that. So through this, there have been loads of people involved, and finally it was handed over to the Christie Walk Community Corporation to govern what is now the Christie Walk community. But the thing that I find striking in this is that although we are now, living with a structure of a community corporation, or actually a complex structure where we have a primary corporation and two secondary corporations, which I can go into more detail later for those who really want to be bored, but it is important to have a formal structure for your ongoing community. But the vision is still important, as I alluded to earlier. I think we still come back full circle to that vision that binds community members together. And we've come back also, I guess, to urban ecology in that urban ecology is still an important part of what we do here. So the vision, I've got some early diagrams there, which are drawings by Paul. The vision was actually not going to be here. It was not going to be at this site, and it was going to be a whole lot bigger. And some people will know about the Halifax project. But essentially, Paul's wacky design, his unusual eye for colour, his love of curved organic shapes, and the incorporation of things like straw bale have always been a defining part of this development. As I said, that final stage of the build was quite different and probably quite a hair-raising moment for a lot of people. How did the money come forward when it needed to? A lot of people put a lot of money in, so money flowed pretty erratically, I think. So there was loans, there was sort of donations, there was loans that turned into donations, and there's some pretty rocky history that lies behind that. But the real importance of building that last and final piece of the Christie Walk puzzle, I think, has multiple aspects to it. One was, if the development had stalled with the first two stages, then we didn't really know what would happen at that boundary if we didn't go ahead and build that, and that was really quite worrying for those that were living on that end of the development. Plus, the idea was that there would be some facilities in this particular apartment block, so if that didn't happen, where would that all go? And I think that was a particularly difficult moment where people had to really put up extra capital to get this thing to happen. So, you know, it is hard work and it's challenging. Management, financial management and project management take up lots of TV shows for single builds. For a whole development, it's mind-blowing, and I think that's one of the things where there are lots and lots of pitfalls along the way, and it's important to be able to get that right. When we finally arrive at the completion, and this picture, I think, is the view from the last straw bale of stage 2, looking out to what is now that large apartment block. But if it was not going to be built, would have been quite something to worry about what would go up there. So we've got 27 dwellings on just 2,000 square metres, which, depending on which stats you quote, which definitions you quote, could be medium or could be high density. It doesn't feel like high density. It feels very different, feels very, very rural, in fact, for an inner city development. There are 4 straw bale houses, 4 townhouses, 6 apartments in one block and 13 apartments in another, and lots of shared facilities. So we have a shared laundry, a community room with kitchen, a tool shed. We have 2 lots of bike storage now. That's been an important journey, getting more bike storage on site. We have a kitchen garden and a roof garden. And the gardens that run through Christie Walk, which are pedestrian spaces, are really important shared spaces as well, and give it the incredible feel that it has. And coming on to community, this is a quote from one of our dear founding members, Effie Best, who died earlier this year, but she really hits the nail on the head here. I love looking out of my living room windows and being able to say hello to my neighbours. Living here requires a commitment and extra work, but we are rewarded in so many ways. And the photo that you see there is of a recent Neighbour Day, which was a thoroughly enjoyable time for everyone here, putting the cars out of the courtyard, putting the tables up, sharing a meal, sharing conversation, sharing wine, sharing ourselves with the Adelaide Council once again while they came and took photos of us, because, you know, we are a jewel in their crown. But it's lovely to be loved, and the publicity is great. I think I learned from Paul Downton that publicity is worthwhile, and he would go quite a way to get that. Even we even welcomed John Howard here at one point, which was against many people's ethos and values. But I will never forget him coming into another resident's house who refused to meet him, and he shook my hand because I was stationed there to be the caretaker at the time, and he said, "Sorry for the invasion." And I wanted to say, "I'm not a First Nations person, you've got the wrong one." So, but all jokes aside, having John Howard visit, apart from the insane security that was involved, got us on the map for people that would normally see us, and so there are benefits. But on the whole, this community likes to talk with each other, talk with people who share their values, and really it's enjoyable. How do we make it work? As I said before, those three organisations up the top, I guess the Vision, Urban Ecology and Christie Walk Community Corporation are really important. We have the formal structure. It's important because you do need some way of taking care of the money, taking care of the finance, the insurance, the formal parts of the community. But the formal structures don't build community on their own. And in fact, even with a shared vision, it's not enough. And we have really devolved into some informal structures that have been really much better and much more inclusive. Voting on everything is pretty boring and gives things a legalistic kind of view that it doesn't feel as nice as reaching consensus. And so the informal structures are better, and they don't rely on everyone having voting entitlements, etc. So what we have is a series of what we call working groups, and those groups then elect to look after big decisions in the garden, what to plant where. If they're really big decisions, like maybe it's a tree, then maybe they'll come back to the bigger group. If it's a big spend, they'll come back to the bigger group. So those informal structures work much better. We give them some actual budget allocation at the AGM each year, and so they can sort of go nuts within a confined limit there. And that's been good. It's much better in terms of bringing people on board, having people's interest harnessed. If you're not into the garden, why would you want to join that group? Why would you want to look after it? But maybe you care about looking after the laundry and making sure the machines are serviced, and so you'll do that kind of work. So there's horses for courses. People can get involved, and people have a say, which is really, really important. Being able to give everyone a voice is really important, and it's not easy sometimes. I promised you some other C words, and those are conflict, cats, and cars. Now, I was just, I'm blown away every time. So I think I heard you mention, Graham, I heard you mention cats and dogs, and I heard you mention cars. Now, these are the things that conflict is really made of. And I remember getting hold of a manual for another place far over in the US of A, and they had cars and cats as headline conflict problems. Yeah. So what am I talking about? Well, you have to have a process for managing conflict. Hopefully you don't have to enact it very often, but you have to have a process. You have to understand, I think, that repair is important in community, because if you don't repair, it gets to be deep wounds that are difficult to manage. That's not to say conflict won't happen. It will arise from time to time, but it's good to have a way of dealing with it. Cats, of all the pets, cause more conflict because there are those that worry about Australian native animals and birds and the feral cat situation, and so don't. But as Graham alluded to, pets are really, really important, and cats are something that does better in a small space, in a small apartment, than other animals and other pets. So you kind of have to find a way to deal with it. And I think car spaces, my feeling about them is that was a big mistake. They were given out ad hoc to residents, which seemed like a good idea at the time, at the start. But I think now that we are looking to do more formal sharing, and we would like to do more electric vehicles, perhaps, that becomes a real barrier, and so that allocation carries a financial tag that, you know, if it's hooked to a dwelling, it's not so easy to unpick. So that would be something I would get right at the start. As the quote from Effie Best said, effort and reward are two of the things that go hand in hand. So you don't get the rewards of community without putting in effort. You're not going to love everyone all the time, but you know, you've got to work out how you're going to function in community and how that community is going to best reward each other for hanging in there. Living more sustainably, 2 decades on for Christie Walk. Wow, have we got some old technology here? Have we got some old stuff? And we've had to address that. And it's really important not to be just peddling the same old stuff. So passive solar design is one thing, but you know, Adelaide summers have become more punishing, and it's not okay to live without some form of cooling. It's not okay to live without some form of heating sometimes. So we've had to work out how to do that, but we can upgrade our sustainable credentials. So some of the things we've done is to get ultra low flow shower heads. They are much better than the standard low flow, and they are a different kind of shower, but they are amazing. And it's not just water saving, but you save on heating the water. And when you realise that, if you're all sharing something in an apartment, that's quite a considerable incentive for everyone to come on board. We've upgraded our photovoltaic cells, which has been really important to get more efficient ones. And that is very important for the community because that's an income stream as well. LED lighting is a no-brainer. Everyone can do that, but it's something worth doing. And we've adopted evacuated tube solar water heating technology to really improve upon our initial hot water solar panels. Battery storage electricity is something that we tentatively got 1 battery. We now have 2. We're looking at becoming a microgrid, and so more and more plans come on the horizon, and it's very exciting, but it requires a lot of research, a lot of effort, and we're fortunate to have particularly one member of the community who is very good at driving that. It is quite a lot of thinking through, but then there's also a lot of effort on the part of the whole community in terms of how that is implemented. I wanted to touch on something that's irked me forever, because in those early Ecopolis principles, it talked about equity and social equity, and affordability of the housing at Christie Walk is not a thing. There is estimated to be a 20% higher cost of the sustainable buildings generally that are currently around, and I think that's probably true here. Is it an equity issue? I mean, if you can squeeze yourself into a small apartment, you might get into the market here. We're living in high cost real estate in the middle of the city, so it's a big deal, but I don't know that it's something we can solve on an individual level, but it's something that we can continue to lobby government for, particularly at this point in time when we see absolute crisis in terms of housing. Dwellings at Christie Walk do seem to hold their value, so that's good news for those paying that premium price. And using grants and subsidies for technologies and innovations is one way that you can claw back some money. One thing I wanted to also touch on was our green fund, which is an income stream, as I said. The community owns the photovoltaic cells on the large apartment block and another small bank on the rooftop garden of the small apartment block, and that the money coming from electricity sold to the grid or electricity sold to residents feels like money for nothing. Of course it's not, but what it does is it just goes into a fund that we can then use, and that income stream then is dedicated to renewing our sustainable technologies. And so that just helps give a bit of a boost and makes us feel like it's all possible. Partly it's psychological because we could do it another way, but because it happens that way, it makes it easier. So I alluded to communication about us trumpeting sustainable living to the wider community, and urban ecology as a charitable environmental organisation is a good way of doing that. So it's good to have this additional front face for Christie Walk that is not us, but is part of us and very, very integrated and very enmeshed. But we have a website where we can showcase things like perhaps a recording of today. We have Sustainable House Day that we've opened Christie Walk for a number of times. We have incessant site tours with school children stomping through houses and through the community, which is just fantastic because we know that we're educating that next generation and it's so important. UEA events like the one today and our wonderful carbon neutral ambassador role, which has got us to a few gigs at the town hall and so forth, which is really good. But also communication for living as a community. Communication can't ever be understated, and I think there are so many ways you have to do it. Not everyone's going to read minutes of meetings. Not everyone's good at email. Some people absolutely need that face-to-face communication, and if you're talking about resolving conflict, that's probably the way forward. One of the best things about sharing a laundry is you're likely to bump into someone just doing an everyday thing like picking up the washing, and I think that that's actually perhaps one of the best and easy ways of catching up with people is going to the laundry. Apart from that, we do have shared meals and some other events which are delightful, and not everyone goes. We have working bees, which are perhaps our biggest way of people communicating and I guess contributing to the community. We've never forced anyone to participate, but coming along to a working bee and just doing what you can do is a great way of actually showing that you care about the community and contributing. So that's the 4 C's. Thanks for listening. Here's 2 of the pivotal founding members, our dear Dr. Effie Best and the wonderful Paul Downton. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Okay, so so I've got a bit of a PowerPoint just of photographs, and it's just to break up the text. The text and the photographs don't actually match together. It's just background photographs of the village over the years for people to have a look at as I'm talking. So I'm Tricia O'Donovan. I've been involved in the Eco Village at Aldinga since its beginnings, which was 20 years ago. And for the last 5 years, I've been the treasurer. So we've just celebrated our 20th birthday. It's had a couple of phases in its development. The first phase I'm going to call the founding community. The founding community was intentional. It represented the joining of 2 communities of interest to establish a settlement, a village with dual focus of arts and permaculture. It took over a decade to identify suitable land, and at that point, the development company was formed by the leaders of the communities, John Maitland and Steve Poole. A development company was an essential part of the process because contracts needed to be signed, high-level negotiations were needed with government who owned the land, and business decision-making and loan funds were needed. The development company wasn't a traditional developer. Behind them, they had a diverse community who trusted and relied on them to deliver, which they did. The 500,000 funds required to purchase the 34-hectare land came from individual founding community members. The land itself was probably bigger than they really wanted, but it was available and it ticked most boxes. But it meant the development was 181 residential and commercial lots with 15 hectares of statutory zoned open space, which has since become the farm. It's a very ambitious project for a non-traditional developer. The Community Titles Act was a new piece of legislation 20 years ago, largely untried, untested. This new legislation was used to establish the legal structure of the development, and a community corporation was created. I think we were all lulled into thinking that the Act would support community because the word community is in its name. But there's nothing within the Community Titles Act to support community. The Community Titles Act is about land title and property ownership, maintenance and administration of common property. Lesson number 1, Do not rely on the CTA to be the structure for your intentional community. It's suitable for land division and management of common property, but the legislation was not designed with community in mind. Once the community corporation was established, the community shrank to that of lot owners only. So those of the founding community who did not or could not buy land no longer had a role to play in the development of the eco-village. The founding community of AAEV, however, was cohesive enough to establish bylaws and a governance structure to allow community input into the ongoing direction of the village. We have several committees who feed into a management committee so that the day-to-day management of the village is shared. I'll pause it at that spot for a minute while I catch up. Yeah. So this was phase 2 of the village. It was still an intentional community because the people who bought land were those that were part of the founding community. We didn't notice the contraction of the community. We were too excited about owning a slice of the eco-village and building it. But we had a few investors buying land at that point, people who we didn't know and never saw. There are no eligibility criteria or obligations around owning a block of land in the village. We were set up to operate in the housing market. Given its size, anything else wouldn't have been viable. The company did marketing to sell blocks of land on the open market, but the community corporation has always relied on its name to get the message across of what we're trying to achieve. Aldinga Arts Eco Village says enough about what we're on about. Phase 2 saw the development company needing to focus on doing the physical development. They funded an arts worker and a community development worker to work with lot owners for the first 6 months, but it was challenging. No one lived on site, and 20 years ago, not everybody had a computer or a mobile phone or an email address. There was no bumping into people or the ability to have spontaneous catch-ups. There wasn't even a coffee shop at Aldinga, just a servo. There was no social media. The site itself was a construction site. Formal meetings as part of the Community Titles Act were held, and the Community Corporation of Lot Owners did start making decisions. We set the levies. We said no thanks to funding the art worker and the community development worker. With unanimous agreement needed to make any changes to the scheme description, one member of the community corporation voted against a change being proposed by the development company, effectively taking the wind out of the sails of the development for the next 2 or more years. Another lesson here. We've had 3 or 4 decisions over the past 20 years that require unanimous resolution under the Community Titles Act. And with the exception of that first one, each resolution has passed successfully. Without going into detail about how we now make these types of decisions with 181 lot owners, the point to be made is that there were early warning signs that the Community Titles Act couldn't meet all our needs for intentional community. If only at that point we'd had community infrastructure where discussions and decisions could have taken place outside the structure of the Act. The meetings we had could only be described as stormy. I think they were legendary stormy. I took over from John Maitland as the second presiding officer of the Community Corporation, and I lasted 6 months. I was so bruised that I withdrew from the community for about 8 years, and I wasn't alone. During these early years, while we learned about each other, about how to communicate better and how to get things done, there were lots of people who came and went. There was lots of bruising. Some community members have never recovered. Using levies for purposes other than common property improvement or maintenance was always contentious. We argued a lot, for example, about using levies to fund arts. Phase 2 was year 10 of, in year 10 of the Eco Village, the management established a visioning process to identify community priorities. A community hall, so we could get together as a community, was at the top of the list, followed closely by development of the farm, with an aim of feeding the village by 2020. We invested $200,000 towards the farm and restricted other expenditure to allow our sinking fund to accumulate to a level where we could build a community hall without getting a bank loan. By this time, we were doing decision-making better. The Waldorf schools of both Mount Barker and Wollonga channeled many interested families towards us, and residents, friends and families were another category of purchasers or renters. People intent on personal growth and social transformation provided good role models, and non-violent communication started to become the norm. We didn't consciously mandate subscribing to common values, but we all nonetheless learned by observation. So while we have no eligibility criteria, a lot of like-minded people are attracted to the village, and the name and the look of the place either appeals or doesn't appeal to potential residents. The permaculture influence means swales and ponds rather than gutters and drains. It means edible landscape with many orchards, chickens, mulch, compost heaps. We have no fences and no brick veneer homes other than reverse brick veneer. So the place looks different. Houses look like they're designed for energy efficiency. By 2012, about half the lots had homes on them. I'll start it up again.
Yep.
Most were owner occupied. Many of the homes were owner built. The trees were about 2 meters tall, so still not much shade. The village was arranged into neighbourhood groups who met to do planting, weeding and grounds maintenance. We allocated $4,000 per year to neighbourhood groups so they could establish landscape in their local areas. We employed a part-time groundskeeper, mainly to mow weeds on areas not yet established. We established a village-wide irrigation system using the B-grade water from our wastewater treatment plant. This allowed us to further develop orchards throughout the village. 2016 to 20, and we still didn't know how much we should be setting aside for future repairs and replacement. So we developed a 20-year asset plan, so we knew what levies we needed to collect, and we now prioritise asset management in our budget. That means money is set aside for maintenance and replacement of existing assets before we think about new expenditure. We now have a process for annual budget submissions, and new projects require a special levy to raise specific funds for that purpose. All projects require special resolution at the AGM. No new projects are funded outside the AGM process, but we retain a safety net of $60,000 for unexpected events or emergencies. We pay between $1,000 and $1,500 per year per lot in levies. Our levies would be double what they are if we didn't have any volunteering. Building the community hall was a monumental achievement. It took 6 years of mainly volunteer input to design, construct and fit out the space. 3 years ago this Christmas, we poured the slab. At the point we transferred our construction insurance policy to a building insurance policy, our insurer informed us that the hall was only insured for community corporation business. In other words, meetings. Community activities such as happy hours, markets, workshops, etc. were outside the scope of our insurance policy. The hall was consequently locked. We had to work out whether the planned Christmas party, for example, was community initiated or a community corporation event. It took us 6 months to find an insurance broker who would talk to us, then another year to identify that we needed an incorporated association to be established as the community arm of the village in order to manage the risk to lot owners that community uses pose for the community corporation. On reflection, the tension between community and community corporation has existed since day one. But community carries on. We have informal support structures and activities for everyone, including vulnerable people, which are more powerful than any government or council provides. We now need the incorporated association to meet our community objectives, including giving renters and other non-owners of property a voice. We're probably moving into a new phase now. We're more or less sorted out the insurances. The community hall is being used more and more, and with 80% of the land developed, we're now able to think about the value-adding features such as sculptures in the landscape, intimate community spaces in the landscape, and strategic improvements. Constructing walking trails has been significant to opening up all the common spaces to everyone, and we should finish a primary loop or safe track within the village in the coming year. This loop avoids roads wherever it can and is as accessible as possible. We're having a lot more fun because lots of the hard slog is done, but also we have more clarity around how decisions get made, but will always be a work in progress. My own concerns are that the village is becoming unaffordable to many, and this will reduce our diversity and thus sustainability. We operate within the traditional housing market, so it's not until somebody moves in that they begin to receive some orientation to the village. While we've continued to attract like-minded people, we have some residents who don't get involved, who don't interact with neighbours, who don't know what an eco-village is. And we have investors who own property because the village now has a beautiful environment due to the amount of volunteering that takes place. It's a good investment. This is the reality of operating in the open market, and we haven't really considered doing it any differently. Real estate agents don't want to tell people about how much volunteering may be required because they see it as a negative. We see it as a positive. It creates feelings of belongings and camaraderie. It's our strength. I can't say we're looking into such things as community land trusts and private equity housing co-ops. Some of us are. I see disruptions to the traditional housing market as a logical response to the housing crisis, but we're not all on the same page with that. While we have a strong community culture and a beautiful, caring, fun, environmentally aware community, we don't have a mission beyond the boundaries of the village. Is this enough for an intentional community? We don't demonstrate what we've achieved. We don't participate in the international intentional community networks, and we don't liaise with other eco-villages. But of all the lessons I've learned since being involved with AAV is that community will express itself in one way or another, and the collective, if you listen, has wisdom.
Thank you. I'm just going to invite Graham to come back up and take a seat so that we can now maybe have a little bit of a chat. I really I love the commonality of the things that have been brought up, because just listening to you talk, Tricia, it was so many things that you talked about were things that I didn't actually talk about this time, but resonate really well. You know, the idea that your community room can only be used for certain things, and the difficulties with insurers not understanding. We came up against some weird conundrums with COVID too, like, was this our house? Or, you know, because many people who live in small dwellings here, you know, the community rooms, their lounge rooms, so were they allowed to come and share, or was that considered against the rules? So it was really difficult. Yeah, but cats comes up again and again.
We actually don't have a lot of problems with cats because every cat is required to be in a cat enclosure. They're not allowed out and about. It's dogs that we have a problem with.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, you know, there's probably as many dogs as there are lots, and people love their dogs, and they bark and they shit.
And I guess if owners aren't present, that can be a problem too if the dogs are.
And we don't have fences.
Don't have fences, yeah. All right. Well, on a more positive note, what are you most proud of about Aldinga Arts Eco Village?
I reckon it's the multi-generational nature of the community and the extended families that are living there now. So we've got a lot of people that have moved into the village, and then grandma and grandpa also move into the village, so they're living down the road. And friends and other family members, or kids grow up and leave and they're coming back. And it's really lovely to see all of that extended family stuff happening. So the multi-generation aspect of it is great. I mean, it's a great place to live if you're a child, and it's a great place to live if you're an older person as well, and of course everything in between.
Graham, what are you most proud of in Miller's Corner?
I think probably getting to the stage where we really are starting to develop a community, and just the casual interactions which you have with people, which I just don't experience most other places. You know, so we live close, but we don't live in each other's pockets. We're aware of each other. We occasionally do chores for people or help if people can't do it, and just to I suppose also seeing, you know, taking that vision and actually creating a space which has really, it's taken on a life of its own. It's an entity in itself, and it's nurturing. You know, you go out and you can really just feel at peace with the land. You know, so it was something which was nearly like an entity which was being called to be born, and we were just the facilitators, probably just, I mean, a bit like parents, I suppose, that, you know, and having it come where I really feel very comfortable there now, and it's, I suppose, very proud of being able to achieve the architectural, you know, using architecture. I know that Paul, because Paul came up to business in the very early stages as well, and the way places are built and how they're built, and the relationships between the buildings, they actually create an environment which we interact with, and that's really, really special for me. It's just not, you know, I don't know whether you've been to Mount Barker recently, but it's just appalling, the new developments up there. Just, you know, roof to roof to roof, and here you come in and it's just, you know, yeah, most people who come there just sort of say, wow, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm most proud of the fact that this is an oasis in the city, and it's just so different to inner city living. But I guess I'm equally proud of the ability that the community has to care for people, and we talked earlier about Effie and how she was supported by this community toward the end of her life. You know, people that put into a community get back from a community as well, and I think that's lovely. That's a very human thing that you perhaps don't get everywhere, but it's great to have it here. It's really good.
And experiencing the joy of actually working with people in a common cause is just such a fantastic thing. You know, it strips away the burden of the work, and I just have the pleasure of the company and the doing.
Certainly, I was struck when I was listening to Tricia talk about some of the more difficult times. I was reflecting back on when we had some significant conflict, and the fact that the Community Titles Act doesn't really help you when you want to change something. If one person wants to go out on a limb, it can be very divisive. But conflict was very difficult here at one point, and even more so bringing on a whole other group of people after we'd been working our way through things. When the new apartment block came in, there was a doubling of residents. It's a lot.
In the village, we've got about 310 people living there. We did try sociocracy some years ago, but again, that requires training and commitment. So we've since borrowed bits and pieces from it, and we've got a team of trained counsellors and mediators who make themselves available if we do have conflict. We don't use it a lot. We're just more skilled. I think everybody is more skilled now about communicating better, being a little bit more tolerant, and just, you know, understanding a bit more about how community operates. So yeah, things are going pretty smoothly at the moment.
That's great.
Yeah,
you do have to be more tolerant to live in a community. And I thought what Graham said about you can't live in each other's pockets either. I mean, even though you're very close, you have to be able to give people distance. Well, here we're very close. I mean, how does it work for you in a bigger space though? I mean, you don't have fences.
Well, the fences are an interesting one. There was an article recently about living without fences, because fences give you a boundary that sometimes can be security for people. It tells you where your personal space starts and finishes, and without fences, it can be a bit tricky. The kids don't mind it; they'll run everywhere throughout the whole village. And we mark boundaries with landscape, so you know it's relatively easy to see where private becomes semi-private, becomes community, becomes public, but it does take a bit of getting used to. But it's landscape. It's the landscape that we nurture to sort of support privacy.
Yeah, I really like the sound of that, and I think same emotional landscape. it's about humans reading each other about whether someone wants to engage or not. Does anyone have any questions from online that they'd like to ask? Anyone in the room have any questions? No. All right. Sue.
Hi, Tricia.
Hi, Sue.
I just wondered if any of the buildings at Aldinga and at Miller's Corner are sort of totally accessible for people with disabilities.
I'm not sure about all of them, but I know the ones in Orchard Walk are, which is 11 properties specifically designed to be accessible. The others, we have a lot of older people living in our cottages. Or most of the properties in the village are ground floor. We don't have many two-story buildings. But yeah, so yes.
Yeah, there's and there's principles in place for ageing in place.
There isn't. Our bylaws were written 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So those sort of things weren't included, and even they were written before star ratings were in as well. John Maitland helped develop the star rating system, but at the time he wrote building guidelines for us for passive solar design and energy efficiency in the absence of any star rating. So we don't know, you know, those houses that were built back then were all built to those bylaws, to those standards, but we don't have any star ratings on any of the except that were built more recently.
But in the big scheme of things, aren't we all lucky where we live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Spiral staircases aren't particularly good for ageing, which is why I think the mix of dwellings here has been really useful to consider if you needed to move somewhere different, the big apartment with a lift. Now finally a lift has gone into the small apartment block, which is helpful, but as Sue's well aware, there's quite a lot of issues with accessibility in Christie Walk because it was never designed to be easily accessible.
Regarding Miller's Corner, the community centre certainly has been built with that in mind. There's wheelchair ramp access basically getting built at the moment. The doors and the bathroom facilities they're 900 wide, so that there's space to move around. There's the shower area in there is very large. There's and there's universal access toilet, etc. With regarding the individual dwellings, we had a scheme description which basically showed what needed to be done from a streetscape perspective. We were actually directly involved in the design, which was specifically for universal access, and between the architect and the concrete, it managed to come in 300 millimetres. The slab was 300 millimetres higher than it was designed to be, and no one took responsibility for that. So we've basically had to sort of look at how to put a pathway in there, which might be a little bit winding to get the gradient so that wheelchair access could be undertaken. Again, within that particular dwelling, it's two bedroom one. The doors are 900 millimetres wide. The shower is about 1.2 metres wide, so it's a very large, spacious bathroom, which does allow that, but it's not in terms of other specific things like handrails and that. The provisions for those are there, but they actually haven't been put in at this point in time. So, in concept, I mean, Leah, my partner and co-founder, is an occupational therapist, so these were very important. And she worked with the older folks, and she still reminds me of the slab being 300 millimetres high on occasions.
That's fantastic.
things you can't go back and change. So speaking of that, if you could rewind, is there anything specifically you would do differently?
No. I mean, yes, we would probably think more about the community and how to cater for the wider community, not just the property owners via the community corporation. But really, until the community hall, which we call the sharing shed, was built, it wasn't a huge issue. It was that really prompted everybody to think about the difference between the community corporation and the community. So had we had a community association, a bit like the way Christie Walk has got urban ecology, if we had a relationship with a incorporated association back then, it might have been different. In a physical sense, there's all living there, you always reflect on how it could have been better. We've got 11 commercial lots at the very front of the village. And just the nature of the development in the local area is such that the commercial lots have never been developed. So they're vacant blocks of land 20 years down the track. Only 3 of them have been built on. And they're right at the front of the village. So the outlook of the front of the village is, weedy, vacant lots with a dusty old car park behind them. So we probably would have thought through that one differently. But then, nobody had a crystal ball. You didn't know, you just didn't know what was going to go on. So, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, in some ways you only know what you need when you get there. But I still think there are some things that, knowing what the infrastructure of the wider society is, you can do better within, like, knowing about community title now. You would put different things in your scheme description potentially to give you wider scope and not have to go back and change things.
We might even have a secondary community corporation within there. Yeah.
The only problem we've had with a secondary corporation, I would say, is that it looks like gross inequity in some things because you get one vote on the primary, so it doesn't work particularly well. But so thinking all those things through, how you intersect with the wider societal structures is important. Things like SA Water have allowed us to divvy up our bill 27 ways for ages, but it was a headache getting them to do that. So having control over things like, and I know Brian would not forgive me if I didn't say single point electricity kind of connection, so you could then do your own microgrid within things like that.
That is what we're looking at. We've got a single point of water coming in, so we all use rainwater, and mains water is just a backup. And similarly with electricity, we're looking at an embedded network between now and 2028, when everybody loses their 60 cents a kilowatt tariff. So we've got an energy strategy underway, and we've always had a water strategy underway. But I mean, the size of Aldinga is probably not what the founding communities were thinking of when they agreed to buy the land, because it's so huge. 181 lots in an intentional community is big. It's they usually say 30 is a good size. So it could have been divided up into several smaller communities, but then that might have created conflict as well. So we are managing with the whole the big amount, but it is different.
A good colleague of mine once said that you get more than the size of an AFL football team and you get factions. So I think that we really saw that when we brought on the third stage and we doubled the resident population. But this is yet to come for you, Graham.
Indeed, yes. What would we have done differently? I think we benefit immensely from what's been gone before us, and also the fact that we came at a point of time when things like an embedded network was something which I spoke to South Australian Power Networks and said, "Oh, we'll design it for you." So that was a sort of a freebie on their part. It hasn't actually been totally implemented, but all the infrastructure is in there to do it. So we were really, I think Christie Walk bylaws were very good. We modified them slightly to suit our needs. We were in a different situation. The scheme description, we worked with one architect. Again, that made a huge difference, because then you could we had an image of what we wanted and how that related, and all of the architect had designed the Living Arts Centre at the Waldorf School in Mount Barker, and really could relate to what we were doing very well. And so all the buildings relate to each other, and that there's just a sense of continuity and smoothness, and so the cohesion there. So we really haven't. Our intention with the scheme description and bylaws were that we would wait until everyone was resident there, was fully developed, and then we would go back and we would look at any particular issues. But at this point in time, there's been no major things which we've said, no, look, we'd like to tweak that, or look, I'm only speaking from my part. I mean, other residents may have different views. So in terms of what we'd like to change, look, we had to adapt to the circumstances in which we were. We were different from, because we owned the land, and we owned the land at a time when it was a little country town, so it wasn't hugely expensive, and to then I suppose we also had the benefit of having that. We had the capacity to determine the direction, but we missed out on the contribution of the input in others. So we sort of we've held it like this, keeping it there, and now we're sort of we're trying to sort of step away and bring others in to add their bit to the jigsaw puzzle and really create that community. And that's that I don't know how we could have done it differently. And so we sort of accept that was sort of it's like your child. You love it as it is.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's not a lot of regrets. There's just an acceptance that life happens like that, and I think that's right. And I think the common shared vision is the thing that holds it together, and wanting to work it through, because no doubt that there are problems to be solved, but wanting to work it through. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Oh, go for it. Come off mute, Sandy.
Hi, I've got a quick question, and I know Brian has one too. Tricia, I think the Aldinga Arts Eco Village is just absolutely stunning, and the landscaping, it's mind-blowing how beautifully it's all developed. Quick question, can members of the public walk through the Eco Village?
Yes. We have private roads that comply with public requirements. Right. So yes, they can. We're not gated. Anybody can walk through, anybody can drive through, and people do all the time. We've had a couple of tours over the years for schools, mainly, but we don't, as I said, we don't promote how gorgeous the village is. We don't have that public face because there's that tension between we're just trying to enjoy where we live.
Exactly.
Versus telling everybody, look, you could be doing this better. This is a way that might be better than your traditional suburb.
No. And the natural.
Want to come and visit, fine, go for it. You don't have to make an appointment.
Question: whether people would consider doing a bus tour of the 3 places for people interested in one day. I don't know, is that too much? Is that too far?
Yeah.
Physically, is that too far?
It's a journey.
Or maybe over a couple of
2 out of 3 might work.
But actually doing something like that would be interesting, because it's one thing to see the slides, but it would be wonderful just to see somebody pointing at stuff.
I'll put that to the community. Yeah.
Thanks.
Baya's got one.
Bea, would you like to?
You're
You're
on
mute.
Joe, can you unmute me? Yeah.
I'm trying.
Is that it?
I can only ask to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay.
Thank you all for this, and thanks, Tricia. It is certainly an incredible experience to live here. My name is Bea. As you can hear on my accent, as people notice always, I come from the Netherlands. I was part of listening and very early on from the Steiner School where this was going to happen, and because we moved to the NT when we came back in 2010, it had established quite a few things already. If I would, the question, if I would have been here in the beginning, maybe everything what is done now, I would be in the same boat. If I now would been asked by, and I'm a member of the Global, and at Global Sustainable Village, I would suggest a smaller community and bylaw where you would be very consciously about living with the idea of global warming. And we don't do that here very well. We have an overload of cars, an overload of people that still not are aware what you can buy and what you can throw out. All that is because we are now much more towards that thinking. So the change for me would be going to a community that is smaller, much more conscious about the sustainability, and not even sure if we've been on a bike ride in Europe recently, a few years ago, and we visited some of the sustainable villages, including one in the south of the Netherlands. And they, as I said before, have started with a community hall. The people that wanted to build, they built a hall, and they had little cottage, little movable sort of cabins where people started to live in. And then when the hall was finished, they all built together a new one another's houses. So they were really community conscious, and all had one day a week. They were committed to work as a volunteer. There was no hope you could say no, and it became an incredible strong community. They built about 6 different, they built the houses in a beehive, like a beehive building. And when you go back there, you certainly realize that a smaller community, it is more possible. And they're very, very conscious about the future of our generations to come. That's what we have now after 20 years. It's hard to come back to that because we live a very well way of living in this village. But forget that sometimes, that the concerns that is for the next generations.
I also think the fact that we become quite a popular village, and it works quite well. We have the danger of becoming a bit elitist if you look at house prices now.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and
I've seen examples where communities have sort of things in place that you could avoid it, that prices just grow and grow and grow, but it's too late to do that. So there's a bit of a danger that you attract people who think it's affordable, they come from Sydney or Melbourne and think it's cheap here, and who are not necessarily
that's what Tricia
very
said
much
before.
interested in becoming part of the community. So that is a bit dangerous. And another thing I think we haven't anticipated is quite a few people have moved on and rent their houses out. So you have tenants that are not always, very often not really connected to the village anymore. And that's a bit sad. but otherwise I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
No. And by the way, Tricia, and today we went to the front with our little one in wheelchair in the commercial block, and we had our first ice creams, because there's a beautiful caravan, a beautiful place built by a commercial person that bought the land, and now we're all the villagers enjoying the ice cream. So we have a really nice place there to go to. And the brings kids together and they play. And besides that, we have a bookshop, and second-hand bookshop is next to them. So you have your ice cream, you go to the bookshop, you come back, and there's more villagers to sit and talk together. So that's a really good start again.
Perfect. Yeah, well done. Brian.
Hi. Just going back to what we're all proud of, I think it's incredible that these things actually exist now. And I think particularly for the early people who are involved in Christie Walk, and you, Tricia, weathering those storms in the early years and now coming back on stream as the treasurer, I think that's remarkable. And I'd say you should be proud of that, and congratulations. It's absolutely wonderful.
I wouldn't want to live anywhere else either.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
One of the themes that's run through today, I think, has been on recruiting new owners and recruiting new tenants who are eager to participate, both in an ecological sense and also in a community sense. And I just wanted to mention Smart Home Vision, who are a real estate agent who have started renting some of the dwellings at Christie Walk. And each time they rent a new place, they get more and more familiar with ecological standards and with community involvement and so on. So it's been a really good development that they are being used more and more now at Christie Walk. So
Great.
I think both of the other villages would benefit from that. So it's Smart Home Vision is the name of it.
That's it, yeah.
So they're a regular commercial real estate agent, but they are interested to some extent in green living and becoming more interested in it. So that's excellent.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
The other thing is, I pricked up my ears when, Graham, you mentioned an embedded network, and I'm particularly keen when I hear you say that SA Power Networks designed it for you. That's amazing. So I will have a discussion with you afterwards about your contacts at SA Power Networks, so we can have a bit of a chat about that. And also, Tricia, if you're heading in that direction as well, it'd be great for us to all stay in contact, because that's one of the big things that we're working on now too. We are partially embedded in that our big apartment block is fully embedded, but then the rest of the site is not embedded. So we're halfway along the way.
Thanks, Brian. Bonnie, did you want to make a comment, ask a question?
Yeah. I'm in the extremely fortunate position of having benefited from all the hard work that went into first Christie Walk, where I lived for 12 years, and then having moved into the Aldinga Eco Village and reaped the benefit of all the hard work that's gone in ahead in both places. And it's been a really interesting journey to go from a very small eco village into a large one. I think that the process of welcoming new people in is a really, really important part of communities. So we evolved it in Christie Walk while I was there, and I think that having that system of welcoming people and making sure people are socially integrated is a really, really important thing. And in the eco village here, like I've only been here just a bit over a year, and there's so many, like I will never know everybody here, I know, but
it's amazing how many people I've gotten to know and be good friends with in a very short space of time, and that's partly because of that whole process. So, yeah.
Great point. Thank you.
And what I wanted to say as well, I'm not sure if that can be done here. I don't know. The community that we did visit in the south of the Netherlands, they were very strongly supported by businesses and the councils and the government, because they were more or less used for new experiments. So so for example, the solar systems, they had different solar systems. So they financially as well as supportive in helping them to set it up. Or there was different projects that then when said was supported by businesses. So they had actually a really good communication with the whole community on the outside, which was, I don't know if that can be happening here, but because of course the Netherlands is very small, most people got interested because they got to see it through news and all that the community was supported by all these other outside businesses. And that for if there was a new instrument or new equipment or new things, they would actually try it out at certain times in the village.
Yeah, certainly that's been one of our benefits in terms of partnering with council. They like to show us off. So so far they've done things like, you know, weigh all of our waste and compost to be proud of us and how we, you know, don't produce much waste. So that's not really a great benefit, but grants and subsidies and promotion is certainly something that Brian has been looking at very closely at the moment and has always been a feature here. So yes, but they do want their pound of flesh, so they do put photos up on their website and do claim ownership. I think it benefited us quite dramatically when we had a threat of overshadowing, because the council had really endorsed us and then couldn't back away when we wanted to fight against our solar overshadowing. So I think there are great benefits in partnering. Yes, a lot harder with business though. I think a lot harder. All right. Yes, Brian.
Trisha, I just wanted to ask you how you cope with unwanted intruders at night and damage to property and all that sort of thing, being ungated, which we are sort of. Yeah, we do have, and because we're inner urban, we do have things stolen and damaged and so on. Not much damage, but stolen for sure.
Yes, and we, to a small degree, we're outer urban, and until recently, I mean, right now we've got a super school recently built across the road from us, lots of sporting facilities for the whole council area, and 1,000 home development going up in the next few years. So we're sort of waiting to see if that will result in a higher crime rate within the village. But we've got an internal, we don't use Facebook, but we use something called Band. And if you put, we used to use Facebook, you put something on it and it goes right around the whole village pretty quickly. So if you're walking through the village and people don't know who you are and are a bit suspicious, chances are you've got, you know, 50 people knowing about it and looking out their window to see what you're up to. Good and bad about that, but yeah, I mean the houses that are located closer to Port Road certainly do get more theft than those of us that are way inside the village, away from the road. We're looking at bike sheds and things like that for some of the houses that are close to Port Road, and yeah, but it's an issue, but not a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's never been comfortable to want to lock everything up, but yeah, we've certainly had more noticeable issues. there's a tension when you don't feel safe walking around in your own community at night, I think, which is a tipping point for a lot of people, but very difficult because fences are jumpable, even high ones apparently. There's some amazing things. Brian, you've got another question.
Another question for Graham. How did you manage, like you were the original owners of the land, did you sell that land to the community corporation, or are you somehow super owners still, or how does that work?
No, look, it was just there was just a community subdivision done, so it's all community title, and our original house is one of the community title blocks. We're currently doing a small subdivision within the lot, one of the larger lots at the moment. We originally had tried to get some smaller lots there, but the council wouldn't have it. They were less than 250 square metres. But regulations have since changed, and we did have other plans for it. It was one large building, but we in the end decided we would go through with that subdivision of the smaller lot. So yeah, we're just we did look at just taking up our house out of the equation and essentially putting all of the land into a community, into a separate entity. But at the end of the day, we just did it as I suppose a property developer doing a community title.
So you're no longer financially responsible yourselves personally for the development?
No, we're only responsible for the lot which we own.
Right.
Yeah, good point. All right, I'm thinking that it's probably time to wrap up and feed everyone on this end. You can't see the crowd of hungry people that I'm looking at, but I think it's been wonderful to hear the stories from 3 different but so similar in so many ways communities. The challenges seem to be very similar. I love the fact that there's very little regret. There's just effort and reward as the stories and overcoming challenges, and most people I think would have to agree that we feel very lucky to live where we live. But it's not just luck, because I think a lot of hard work has gone into all of it, but certainly it feels like it's a good way to live. So thanks for sharing, everyone, and thanks for joining in online.
Thanks for organising, Joan, and I really appreciate actually sitting down with a group of people who know what you're talking about, and there's a common language, and sort of knowing that you're not you don't walk this journey alone. That there's other people there who have done the hard work and are doing the hard work, and sometimes it is hard, but as you mentioned, the rewards certainly outweigh the some of the pain that you go through at times.
Absolutely.
Well, you did a good job for Graham, and say hello to Leah.
Right, thanks, Leah.
Hello, Leah.
Oh, you are there. Why are you hiding?
Not everyone can be on camera. I just turn around for the last minute.
Okay. Oh, you're sitting in the corner there in that beautiful place of yours.
Yeah, but not a very good view, but anyway.
No,
right.
well.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.